Christians have the best content in the world. So why aren't we sharing it? My name's Andrew Noble. I'm one of the hosts of What Would Jesus Tech. One of the things I've found over the 3 years that we've done this podcast is there's a group of people who hate social media, who are against it, who aren't on it, and yet endlessly critique it. And then there's another camp who kind of blindly adopt it, and they don't show an awareness to how it influences them and the dangers of it. And we've tried to be in the middle, but we need to be more wise, more shrewd. We need to use social media for the good ends that it can produce while also being aware of its consequences. And so that's why we're starting this new podcast series called Multiplying the Word. In Acts 12, verse 24, it says this, the word of God increased and multiplied. That's our prayer. When Austin, Joel, and I got together and were deciding to do this series, we were like, we need more wisdom in church leadership, in individual Christians who are using social media, in Christian organizations who are trying to get their good content out there online. Yes, let's not be afraid of using Roman roads. Imagine if Paul said it's too expensive to do these journeys on Roman roads. It's not worth it to use that technology. We need to use the technology of our day, share our good content, and do it wisely. And so that's why we're doing this series. 4 episodes all about multiplying the word. This is an introduction with Chris Martin. We're going to go into detail in future episodes for church leaders, as well as for individuals, as well as for Christian organizations. Keep listening. And if you are interested in supporting us, you can do so on patreon.com. Thanks.
How should Christians spread the word in a digital age? Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech, a podcast devoted to imitating Jesus in a technical age. We believe deep thinking with biblical theology, courageous building of good technology, and rich reflection on what it means to be human. I am Austin Gravely. I am the social media manager of the Gospel Coalition. I have a background in ministry and in online marketing, and I'm joined with Joel Jacob, who is product at Splunk. Is that right, Joel? Did I got that right?
Yeah.
He has a background in AI and robotics and engineering. We are also joined in spirit by our third co-host, Andrew Noble, who is trying to get on the call, but is presently having technical difficulties. He may join us, he may not, but I figured I would introduce him all the same. But our guest today is the one, the only Chris Martin. Chris, it is a delight to have you on What Would Jesus Tech. Thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to us today about marketing and marketing in Christian circles and Christian spaces and how we can do that well.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here. I was reminiscing with Andrew and Joel before you hopped on and before we lost Andrew. No offense, I don't know if I like that trade necessarily, but before you hopped on and before we lost Andrew, we were talking about how I was one of the first guests on this way back in the day. So
oh wow,
we were reminiscing a little bit about that, and
we can say he's not a stranger to the pod.
Right?
Yeah. Friend of the pod. Friend of the pod.
Exactly. So I've been here before, and I'm glad to be back.
So Chris, why don't you tell us a bit about what you do and what you're currently doing? We were talking before the recording that you recently just had kind of a shift in your career and what you were doing, and you're now working on some new stuff.
Yeah. So professionally, I spent 7 years at Lifeway Christian Resources doing similar to kind of what you do, Austin. I was in a number of roles at Lifeway over those years, running blogs for executives there, Ed Stetzer and others, and then eventually became head of social media at Lifeway, where I oversaw the whole social media operation. There were like 160 accounts and 60 some people managing all of those accounts. And so we were trying to get all of us running in the same direction. And so I have a lot of experience kind of on the ground in social media management and oversight. And then I left that in 2020 to go serve at Moody Publishers, a Christian book publisher based in downtown Chicago. And I had just a couple roles there. One of them was like a content marketing editor. So I was helping take a lot of our book content and turn it into helpful articles online and some other kind of repurposing of book content into more digital facing content and serving people in that way. And I launched a site called Bible to Life in the process of that, which is doing pretty well still today, and I still get to oversee a lot of that work. After that, for about 6 months, I was the creative director at Moody Publishers. So I actually got out of the online content game professionally for about 6 months and was overseeing our book cover design and that whole process, which is really interesting and really fun. But then in April of this past year, almost a year ago, I moved over to a different part of the Moody Bible Institute, which is the Christian Bible school in downtown Chicago that has Moody Publishers, the school and seminary, and then obviously Moody Radio, which is perhaps one of the best known parts of the Moody Bible Institute historically, coming up on 100 years next year of ministry. They were actually a forerunner of the medium of radio, period.
Right. Yes.
If you look in radio history books, imagine Christian ministries being forerunners in a form of media technology. It sounds ridiculous, but it was true in the early 20th century. But Moody Radio slowly transitioning into a more omni-channel, proper Christian media operation for the 21st century, where radio will still be a significant part of what we're doing. But the folks at Moody Radio around this time last year were like, hey, we should probably start getting into this whole online content deal. And so maybe a decade or two too late, but hey, better late than never. And so they hired me on to be the director of content at Moody Global Media, which means I oversee all of the on-air radio content and have a great team of radio content producers and folks who oversee that kind of on the ground day to day. But I help speak into what's going on the air on the terrestrial side. And then kind of parallel to that, I'm helping architect the digital content initiative of what is now Moody Global Media. We have kind of a brand that we're working, like we're creating a brand around that. It'll be podcast network, YouTube channels, obviously playing into a lot of short form video, and then definitely text as well. And so newsletters, all of that kind of stuff. So it's like, what would it be like to stand up a proper 21st century Christian digital media operation within a large, old legacy Christian radio operation? And so that's a lot of what I spend my time doing. And that's what I'm doing professionally. So I'm still getting to do a lot of online content, but definitely having a lot more than just that going on. And these days, last time I was here, I was talking about one of my books, but I kind of background when my second daughter was born in the fall of 2023, largely stepped back from writing weekly about social media and Christians and technology. And now occasionally write an article here or there when there's a topic that I think I can speak to, but mostly am not writing about this as much these days. So just practicing it more, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. So you just came out with a book in 2023. It was The Wolves in Our Pocket. That was the title of it, right?
Was Wolf 2023? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. What was the response to that? Like, what was the reception of that now that it's been some time since it came out? Did people like it, enjoy it?
Yeah, I think so. It didn't sell a ton, but I think that's in large part because it's hard to write about a topic. It's like writing a book about sin, kind of. It's like people don't like to read books about sin. People don't like to read books about social media use and how they should be convicted about it,
Yeah, exactly.
So I wrote the reason I always get confused on dates is I wrote Terms of Service first, which I wrote that like the year of 2020, like when the pandemic was going on, and I had a newborn and had a lot of time to write, honestly. And so I wrote that, but then it took a while to come out because of some scheduling stuff. It came out in 2022, and in Terms of Service was kind of meant to be like a mirror, like what am I doing with social media and what's it doing to me? And then one of the biggest pieces of feedback I heard from that book was, this is really great, but I'm having to, if I'm a church leader, I'm trying to, it's meant to be kind of a mirror book for the reader. Whereas, if I'm a church leader, I could really use something that feels a little bit more like written for leaders on this topic.
Right.
And so I went to my agent and said, hey, I'm hearing a lot of requests for a more a church leader oriented kind of book on, hey, social media is affecting people in your church or even like people in your home. It's not a parenting book because that would be a certain kind of social media book, but it's certainly applicable in the home. The Wolf in Their Pockets is more of, you see social media changing how people that you're discipling live and how they think about the world and their faith. How do you lead them more effectively when social media is actually discipling them more than you are?
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of the angle of Wolf. And I think that's the reason I think Wolf has sold significantly more than Terms, is it's much just more practical for leaders. It gives more handholds and some more like, hey, here's how you can, as a leader, lead in an environment where people that you're trying to disciple, whether in your church or in your home, or I've gotten feedback from like school principals and teachers of like, students in Christian schools and things like that. They see people around them being impacted by social media and how they think mentally or emotionally, spiritually. And the book has helped them better lead those people and disciple those people with the recognition that social media is probably as influential as they are. And so that's the most common feedback I've gotten from that is just that it's a helpful, it's kind of like discipling in the age of social media is kind of like, it's a help and a tool for that. So
let's take that and let's apply this to your current role in trying to build a digital operation where a digital operation hasn't existed within a legacy media operation. How do you reconcile the things you know to be dangerous and harmful about social media with the fact that you're trying to build a pretty robust social media presence for an organization?
Yeah, totally. So this is, you can understand, especially Austin, because of your work, probably like one of the biggest mental wrestlings of my life and career, right?
It's a daily thing for me.
Exactly.
Like every single day.
Exactly. Because I'm one who, for most of my time thinking and writing on this subject, has said that these are not neutral tools. Mm-hmm. I, no offense, foolishly made that claim for a while at the beginning before I really took time to look into these things. But most of these tools that we're using are not neutral. They're not like, unbiased, but people think about content when they think in that regard. They're not neutral in that they're pushing people towards certain ends. I'm not even so much concerned about ideologies as I am about like habits of use, Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are a lot of ways these tools are just inherently built to not support the mental, emotional, and spiritual health of their users.
Absolutely. Yeah.
However, I don't think that means that we need to stay away from them entirely. Like I don't see these things as like as absolute as that. I think that we can use these tools in spite of their bent toward brokenness. I don't think we have to like, it's because I think they're tools that are bent toward brokenness, not always bound for brokenness, if you will. Like I think,
that's good.
Just like, it's the same thing with Postman and TV, though he wasn't writing from a Christian perspective. Like, is TV bent toward trivialization and foolishness and is the best kind of content for TV, reality TV, and not serious TV? Yes. Like,
he praises junk television and amusing ourselves to death. He talks about the A-Team and several other shows at the time. Like,
right. Like, I think I don't remember where I've seen this, but I've heard people talk about how like he was anti Sesame Street because he's like, you're trying to do like something deep and worthwhile on a medium that's built for drivel, basically.
Yeah.
And I think there's some element of social media in that. And I think that, and this might be where our conversation goes a little bit. I think as Christians who are trying to do stuff in this space, we should always recognize the sort of cap and ceiling of what we're able to do through these forms of media. Like, the way our kind of mission at Moody Global Media is that, and this has always been the case on the radio side, and it will hold as we do stuff on the digital side, because it's not like radio is frankly any more sanctified of a medium than email newsletters or YouTube, in my opinion. Our kind of charge is, we exist to help people take their next steps in their walk with Christ, wherever they're at, whether they're taking their first steps, whether they're taking their final steps before they meet him face to face, or somewhere in between. We exist to help people take their next steps in their walk with Christ. Now, I think discipleship is primarily, you could say, well, that's discipleship. Kind of. I think discipleship is ultimately the work of the church and the local community. And there's only so much discipleship that you can really do, I think, in a healthy way through means like YouTube or radio or any other form of media. And I think what I'm trying to keep in perspective for us as we endeavor on doing more, YouTube content or podcast content through Moody Global Media is, let's, for lack of a better term, like limit our expectations of what we're going to be doing here. Like, let's not have this thought that we're going to be the chief discipler of anybody, or that even that we're going to like lead people to faith. Now, maybe, like, I'm not saying that can't happen. The Lord can use all kinds of things. But what I'm always grappling with is, we should be a tool in the hands of people doing face-to-face discipleship, and like we should be a means kind of toward always pushing toward that kind of end, rather than seeing ourselves as like a primary mode of discipleship for people. Not because you can't, because as I've claimed, social media disciples in a literal sense better than a lot of face-to-face conversations do.
Absolutely.
I just don't think we should necessarily aim for that. Like, I don't think we should try to be that for people. So
you don't
anyway.
want to supplant, the ideal. You just want to support.
Right. Exactly.
So as you're building this new media operation, I mean, y'all are in an interesting spot in that, a lot of Christian organizations have had some kind of digital media presence now for some time. I mean, the accounts that I manage at TGC were created, some of them in the late 2000s. So they're ancient by social media standards. But as y'all are surveying, the internet ecosystem, where are y'all thinking y'all are wanting to spend your time at in terms of social media platforms, and what are the pros and cons to your thinking there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think we're equipped to and should endeavor on every form of digital content available to us. So I'm really pushing for, as we build out our team, because it's quite small on the digital side, having a text-based area, an audio-based area. I'm not even calling it podcast because I don't want to get too tied to a medium, right? I mean, there's a world in which in 20 years, or by the time I'm retiring, that the primary form of audio content consumption on the internet isn't called podcasting anymore. I don't know, but so text-based content, audio-based content, and video-based content. Now, audio and video-based content, there's obviously those circles are very overlapped, because one of the principles I've put out is we will not launch any podcasts moving forward that are not also video. That's good. Preferably that are also not done in person. So far as now, you can't do that all the time, obviously.
It's expensive. It's very expensive.
It's expensive. But to the degree that we can do that kind of thing, let's have that be our North Star and what we're aiming for. Yeah. And so I'm trying to now, obviously, because this is a 100-year-old radio operation. When I first got here, they were like, well, we just want to launch like a podcast network. And I'm like, okay, I think you're thinking too small. Because as you guys know, probably as well as anybody, discoverability for podcasts is terrible.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
Because unless people know who you are or are really interested in a wonderful guest like me, they're not going to just stumble upon your podcast. Most people are not hopping in to your Andrew's talking, but we can't hear him. Most people are not hopping into their favorite podcast app and just like looking up, oh man, I've got a 2-hour drive today. I'd love to listen to a Christian tech podcast, and searching Christian tech podcast in the Apple Podcast app. They're just not doing that. They're like, oh, this pastor I saw went on this podcast, would love to listen. This author or whatever else, or I always listen to these certain ones, and then you're subscribed and that sort of thing. So discoverability for podcasts is awful. And so I think if anyone's launching a podcast and they don't have either a newsletter strategy and or a short form video strategy, they're just setting themselves up for failure. Yeah. So what we're planning to do is launch a number of podcasts, launch a number of YouTube presences that are affiliated with podcasts, but also that are video first content. So like, Moody Global Media is located, we're all distributed, but the home is on a Bible college campus with world-class theology and Bible professors. We have recording space to record video on our campus very easily. There's no reason we shouldn't just set up a studio on the first floor of the Chapman Building in downtown Chicago and have professors come in half an hour after half an hour and give us their best 12 minutes of their best lecture that they have, one after the other, and just have dozens of YouTube videos that can go out and minister to people and help them better understand what Paul means in Romans 12, or what is this parable actually talking about in the Gospel of John, or like have a theology professor, have a children's ministry professor come in and talk about the biggest mistakes people make in their first years in children's ministry. There's no reason we can't be creating a ton of great YouTube. We have people literally who share offices with us talking about this stuff in lectures every day. we can be creating video in that regard. We've never, like, the organization's just never thought like that. And so we'll do video-based, like video-centric content, which will be that, but also like we have Moody Publishers authors. And then there's no reason we wouldn't work with Crossway authors or Zondervan authors. We already have all these people. We already have all their info and email. Why wouldn't we go ahead and work with those people who are kind of like, we're already holding hands with them? And then we can broaden out from there. And then naturally, I mean, I come from more of a text content background, and I built this website when I was at Publishers called Bible to Life. We built it in 2021. We've got Facebook presence of like 17,000 followers, email list of like 15,000 people. We've got about 1,200 articles on the site. We get about 300,000 page views a month, and it's been just me.
It's pretty good.
Like, I'm the only one running it. It's 4 years old, and it's all organic search. Like, we're not really doing, even though we have a good Facebook presence, we're not getting any traffic from social, which is
dead.
A fool's errand anyway.
It's dead for a long time.
I'm using social to build my email list, which is what I think everyone should be using social to do. To
what
begin
we
with.
use. That's what I'm doing with TGC's presence. Is like,
Right.
If I
guys-
can use our social to build our email presence, it's a win.
Yeah.
So you guys mean post on social with a link to sign up to our newsletter, right?
But only after you've given them a ton of valuable content for free that makes them want to take that next step.
And it is pay to play today. If you're trying to do organic on Facebook, forget it. Unless you're also spending money. So I spend a few $100s a month to collect a few hundred emails a month through Facebook, and it's great. And it's fine. It serves me in that way. I just don't expect to grow much of an audience there that's actually going to be devoted to who we are and what we're about. So we'll use the Bible to Life site that's been existing. Like, I was creating it when I was at Publishers, and I kind of brought it over with me to Moody Global Media. We'll use that as a sort of launch pad to get a lot of these projects off the ground. And then a lot of that content is just articles that are refashioned text from our books as a form of content marketing. We've run very limited, like, new, because I've never had a budget for like new articles on the site. So we'll get a budget for like new articles to be written, pay people to write. We've never done, like, I have a weekly newsletter with that website that goes out to those 15,000 folks. We'll start doing more like audience targeted newsletters, and then have podcasts or videos that filter into those newsletters. It's really back to, if anybody knows, like, Gary Vaynerchuk's Cornerstone and Pebble philosophy. Like, the idea here is just to create a ton of Cornerstone content, like weekly hour-long podcasts, 2 or 3 times a week, 15 to 20 minute YouTube videos from various professionals and thinkers in their fields. And then take all of that, those Cornerstone pieces, and pebble them up. So from that 15-minute Cornerstone video that's, 5 ways children's ministers struggle in their first 5 years, each of those ways, which might be a minute or 2 long, each of those is now an Instagram Reel, TikTok, and YouTube short. Like,
exactly
you
right.
just take the cornerstones and chip off a bunch of pebbles, and that becomes your discoverability, because the attention sort of arbitrage on short form video today is insane. And I'm not even a video. I like consuming video. I don't come from like a video background. So there's no, like, I'm a text guy, but online, like, short form video is discoverability today. So if you're launching
100%.
a podcast, short form video. If you want people to watch your 15-minute YouTube video, get them to watch a 30-second short. Same thing, I think,
Chris,
to go for text.
And I think you would agree with this too, Chris, that, like, because you are a TikTok user. Like, you like TikTok, or like is maybe too strong a word, but like, you are a TikTok user.
It's my favorite social media platform since Vine, as a pure user, not going into all of the controversy.
You know that, like, just because Instagram and YouTube and Facebook do short form video, that they're desperately playing catch up to TikTok's discoverability right now, and it's not even close. Like, it's one thing to do short form video, but if you're doing short form video and you're just posting it to your Instagram account or your Facebook page or your YouTube channel, that's good, that's fine.
Sure,
but that will never make up what TikTok's discoverability will do for you at this point.
Totally. But like, because we have some of our morning shows who are kind of getting into doing some video, which I think is great, and I'm just encouraging them to try stuff and see what happens. And like, one of our morning shows back in 2024, they sent me their stats recently for YouTube. They had like, and this is, they're actually live streaming their morning show, as well as creating a bunch of shorts out of that. So their cornerstone is like a 3-hour morning show that's
amazing.
Maybe 50, maybe when you look at the YouTube views, it'll be like 50 or 100 people. Those people didn't even watch the whole thing. They watched like 3 minutes. But then from that, they're just chopping out a bunch of shorts, which is where they get the bulk of their views and watch time. But I did the math, and in 2024, a 3-hour a day morning show on the radio, if they were on for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, every day, they're on the air for like 780 hours.
Gosh, that's so much content.
In 2024 on YouTube, by simply turning on cameras, they're using like iPad cameras. They're not using anything amazing, okay? Because I love how they're just doing it. They're not freaking out about lighting or are we using 1080p? They're just doing it. And in 2024, they posted like 740 pieces of content. They had like 843 days worth of watch time, which was like 20,700 hours approximately. And so I did the math and I was like, you guys had 20, if you had to do 780 hours of a morning show in a year, right? If like one person sat down and listened to every hour, they would listen to 780 hours of content on the air. But you had 20,000 plus hours of watch time on YouTube. You just effectively did 26 years of morning show content hours in a 1 year period by just turning on the camera and creating show. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you see the raw hours, like almost 21,000 hours of ministry done, content consumed, because they're talking about all kinds of matters of faith and life and all of that. And you just turn on the camera. It's not fancy. It's not cool. And so I've joked that, like, I think I want this digital content team's motto to just be like, just post, loser. Like,
that's so good. That's post. So good, man. I love it.
Just create content. Don't freak out about if it's perfect or whatever. Especially, again, speaking specifically to the Christian space, we can do good, God glorifying Christian ministry by just posting and without freaking out about like, oh man, but is the lighting perfect? And what about my camera quality and all of that kind of stuff? So
does that apply to individuals as well? Like,
it applies especially to individuals. I mean, I look at TikTok and I look at how the biggest social media platform in the world is driven by teenagers and young adults with maybe not the best cell phone camera and like Apple earbuds. And they can just talk about whatever they want, and it sounds crappy and it looks crappy, but it's getting millions of views, hundreds of thousands of likes and comments. Like, we think that we have to make everything polished and pretty, and that's what people are wanting, is really high produced content. And sure, there's a place for that, and there's a context where that's appropriate. But if TikTok's existence is any indication, there's a real strong demand for people just putting their phone in their camera and just talking about something they're passionate about and letting people who are interested in that enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the more where professionalism and like quality makes more sense, it's like a scale. Like, the more branded you are, the more professional you may need to seem. Yeah. The more individual you are, the less professional and polished you should be. Because here's the thing, and this just goes back to, like, I told you guys in the pre-show conversation that I haven't talked about this stuff with anybody for a while, and it's just been rolling around in my head. So you're going to get like spicy hot takes, and this isn't really that spicy or anything, but like, I think algorithmically driven. I was pining on the other day on this random Discord server that I'm on, not yours. Sorry. About
you should join people should join our Discord server.
Yeah. And they can see great fun conversations about random things. But I was pining the other day for like the internet of 2004, which wasn't perfect, but there was a certain like spontaneity and curiosity. And I was 13 or 14 at that time. And there is a certain whimsy about the social internet of that time that felt much more fleeting and circumstantial and not as serious or polished then. That's one of the reasons I like Discord, is I get a lot of that vibe from, obviously it varies server to server, but I get a lot of like certain Discord servers I'm in sometimes feel like MySpace circa 2004 and like, which was like gross and gaudy in its own right with all kinds of like, bad HTML coding, all of that kind of thing. But there's something special about it. Yeah, and like and moody music on your Instagram or on your MySpace profiles and things. But I long for that period, and I think what lo-fi, if you will, content creation does, like what unpolished does, is it, for those of us who were around on the internet back then, is it harkens back to that time when things weren't so polished and so algorithmic and so perfect. It's why young people still use Snapchat so much in addition to Instagram, because they know Instagram is like who you are when you leave your house and who you are when you like want to look good. But Snapchat isn't just like, a porn app where people, though it certainly is that for people. Snapchat is
every
also
social,
like right.
Every social media platform is a porn platform. Like, come on.
Right. Exactly. But it's not like, that's what especially in Christian circles, is like, oh, Snapchat, you mean that thing where you can just send nudie pictures to people and not get caught? It's like, okay, well, they're...
Yeah, TikTok gets that all the time too. It's just like, oh, it's just really, really inappropriate stuff. No, it's not. And it's true. Yeah, and it's everywhere.
And Snapchat certainly is that, but it is more than that. And I think what it is, especially for young people, is it's the place where to feel more or less like polished, like more unpolished, like to just feel more real and more raw. And what I think that people want is less polish, because with polish comes the feeling of brandedness and like, oh, it's perfect. The algorithm delivered this up. And it's not just like, I want it to feel real, but it's like, maybe it is just that. Like, I want it to feel real. And the more polished it is, the more produced it feels, and everything feels produced.
And it's also the question of like, who is this for? Like, if you see like this really produced, really branded thing, you probably get an intuitive sense that like this isn't really for you. Like they may want you to hear it, they may want you to engage with it, but you're not necessarily like, you're not interested in highly produced stuff, so you're not going to go out looking for it. I get the sense that a lot of times, like in Christian media circles especially, that like when we're doing really highly produced stuff, like our target audience may be the audiences of our individual organizations, but subconsciously it's more about our peers and networks
totally
than it is like the people that we're called to serve.
Yeah, it becomes a sort of like, I've had that thought in Christian media spaces for a while, and I won't drop any particular like outlets names or anything like that, but sometimes I'm like, are we just creating content for the people who also create content for this thing? Like, is it just insular? Like I think there's a lot of reflection that should be done in that regard. And I think that's why a lot of institutions start losing people, like start losing interest, like broader interest, is because they start creating content. It just becomes so like, I mean, echo chamber is an overused term. And I don't mean that like ideologically. I just mean that in terms of like style, like what you're talking about. Like, I think a lot of times bigger Christian media organizations can start to create content that impresses the people who also create content of like kind, rather than trying to reach the actual like normal pew sitting people who might just be reading it on their phone as they sit in car line or something like that.
And that's not unique to Christian. That's not unique to Christian media too, though. Like we need to say that that's a problem in like the media landscape as a whole right now. You can look at this last election where you have legacy media once again just completely caught off guard that 4 years of super in-depth wall-to-wall coverage of Donald Trump and his scandals or whatever, like just did not translate down at all. And so you have, even in like the secular media world, this kind of insular, like we're all just doing this for each other, and it's not actually reaching the people we think it's reaching.
I mean, like something, so to the Christians who are, being encouraged to just post, how do you change that to kind of like go out there and create? Like, I recently learned through my wife that the Mormon community actually really encourages their constituents or participants to post social content. And that's why there's actually like this massive like social media hub of people in that community. And they're like tactfully trying to, affect the culture and stuff like that. When I'm like, wow, like, is this flying over our heads into like the broader Christian space?
Yeah, another way of asking that question is, I remember, Chris, you said maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, you were like talking about why you wrote the book Terms of Service. And you're like, well, the benefits of social media are obvious, but I need to really speak about the negatives because people aren't realizing that enough. And you wrote the book, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, however long. So has the pendulum swung now where there's Christians that do not realize the benefits of social media?
That's a good question. I think so. I still think if you were to weigh the problem, as in like which is a bigger problem, people not recognizing the benefits of social media or people not recognizing the detriments.
Yeah.
The latter is still the bigger problem. Like
sure.
I think I think that's one of the reasons few people bought the books relative to broader Christian book selling. Like I think it's a sacred cow. I mean, people don't want to examine their relationship, and I'm guilty of this too. I say this as if it's other people's problem. I'm guilty of this as well.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want to examine our relationship with social media too closely because we are pretty aware of how it can negatively impact us, whether that's, the horrors of, believing fake things conspiratorially or otherwise, or just like the thing I'm most guilty of is like when I get off work most days, I don't know how many of you guys have kids, but like, I work from home. I work in a shed in my backyard, like I told you guys, and I go in at 4:30 at the end of the day and go straight into parenting, right? Like there's the one thing I miss about a commute, which I never even really had with kids because I had kids right at the beginning of COVID. But like one thing I kind of miss that I wish I had was a sort of sabbatical of 30 minutes or so between my work and my parenting. And I don't get that.
Yeah.
Wah. But what that results in sometimes is like me sitting with my daughters upstairs in our bonus room while they're playing. And I'm like catching up on a social media platform that I wanted to look at during the day, but didn't, I'm just kind of like, I'm kind of mentally resting by scrolling when I could be sitting there playing. So all of us, I think, have our weaknesses. And like, I don't like that about myself. And I try to break myself of that, of like putting my phone in another room or whatever. But I think those are the kinds of things that are still like inhibiting us a lot, Andrew, of just like raw time and that sort of thing, more than even like grave, like social media shipwrecking people's faith. I think it's maybe just making us like less attentive parents, Like I think there's a lot of things that are still like, aren't like, oh my gosh, these are massive world shattering problems, but they are like making us, like me, not as good of a dad as I could be, or as attentive or things like that. And I still think those merit a lot of attention. Like I think Jonathan Haidt's work in the last year has just been true, like agreed. heroes work in that regard. And I wish more people would pay attention. I mean, certainly plenty of people have, but I wish more people would pay attention to that and apply it to their lives as Christian parents and people. But I do think there is, if there is a burgeoning group of people, Christians, who are ignoring the goods of social media because they're aware of the ills, I would be honored if I had a small part in making that happen. But because it's like, if you're going to choose a problem, I would rather have that problem. I would rather have people ignore the good of social media than ignore the bad. But I do think there is good that we shouldn't ignore, and I don't think anyone is obligated to post. Like I'm barely posting these days and I don't feel bad about it. But I think that there is a measure of, and when I've worked with a lot of like Christian authors in the past and things like that, I think there is a measure of like using your gifts. And this is what it goes back to a lot for me, is like, we've all been given gifts to steward by God. And I think we should all be stewarding those gifts effectively. And for some of us, what that means is, and you can only really know this is, in your own conscience and your relationship with the Lord, is there are some of us for whom stewarding our gifts effectively today maybe means making some content on YouTube or writing articles on the internet or whatever else. Like to give a short, like brief personal aside on this, around last fall, I was actually, this isn't like private. I don't think I'm leaking anything here, but I was actually talking with the Gospel Coalition about maybe coming to work over there. And this was not last fall.
This is news to me.
This is not last fall, as in like 3 or 4 months ago, like 2023. Okay. And I was getting to my time at Moody Publishers, and I was like, man, I just don't know if I want to be Chris, the online content guy, anymore. Like, it's all I've ever done is help Christian media organizations do online content well, and I'm really good at it. Like, I'm stinking good at either creating online content myself or helping others create online content at scale, and like how to do it efficiently and effectively and to serve people for the kingdom of God. I mean, I started writing a blog when I was in 8th grade, and it just like never stopped. Like I've always been doing that professionally. And I was 23, kind of newly 33 in 2023, newly a father in the last couple of years. And I was like, you know what? Like, I think I might want to get out of this whole online content thing and just like become a good leader in this organization and stick around. I love being in Christian publishing. And so I took a job as creative director at Moody Publishers, where I was not doing online content stuff. But at the same time, I was talking with TGC and trying to decide, like, do I want to go over there and maybe do some online content stuff, you know, kind of a similar thing over at TGC. Like, do I want to do that? But I'm like, man, I would be solidifying myself as like Chris, the online content guy, if I went and did that, right? Like I would be doing that. And I was kind of at this fork in the road in my mind of like, do I want to be that anymore? I think I might want to leave online content behind and just like serve a Christian publisher as a leader in a Christian publishing organization and help. Like, I'm not a book cover designer, but I was, you know, going in to help make that operation run smoothly and kind of leave the whole online content thing behind. I did that for about 4 or 5, 6 months from November 2023 until about February of 2024, about a year ago. It was a year ago this time, after being away from being Chris, the online content guy, for 5 or 6 months. And I was like, oh, I think that the Lord has uniquely gifted me for that. And I think I'm running from that because I want to leave that. But I really think I would not be stewarding my gifts and talents effectively if I ran away from being Chris, the online content guy. Like, I think I joked with somebody just yesterday. I said, I think that I was put on this ball of dirt to help Christians do online content. Like, it's just in me. I can't, like, as much as I bemoan it at times, I've literally written 2 books about how social media can be damaging. I am better at that than I am at anything else. And I'm as good, I would say, as anybody at doing that effectively at scale. And so I was just kind of like, about this time last year, I said, I think I need to get over not wanting to be this and steward the gifts God has given me and do what I can to do this well. And so that's why I moved into this role that I'm in now to help stand up this online content operation. And I feel like it doesn't come without its struggles and hardships, but I feel like I'm operating within my gifting again. And it's like a breath of fresh air in that regard. So all of that's to say, that personal anecdote is to say, not everyone is called, not every Christian individual or whatever is called to be posting inspirational content on Instagram or running a YouTube channel or even writing on the internet. But I think, like, if you're a Christian who thinks you have a great ability to communicate in some form in 2025, you should probably figure out how to have a healthier relationship with social media and do that for the good of the kingdom in that way. Yeah. Because even if you just want to write books, you're going to have a relationship with social media in some form.
That's true.
And so, unfortunately, like, I think there is a measure of, not everyone should feel like required or responsible for being online and doing stuff. But if you're gifted as a communicator, there's probably some way where your giftedness as a communicator is going to intersect with that world.
Yeah, I really relate to your story, Chris, because that is my story in a lot of ways too, as well, of having to recognize, like, God has gifted me in these things, and they're not necessarily gifts I sought after. They're not things I wanted to be good in, but it is dishonoring to the Lord to take the gifts he has given me and not use them for his glory and try to talk myself into some reason into not using them. So I deeply relate to your story there.
Yeah. I just think, like, on that note, and this getting out of like online content strategy for a minute, like, I think about that a lot, where, you know, like, and especially as my kids start getting older and we'll start having conversations about, like, you know, what they want to do with their lives. I mean, they're only like 5 and 1 at this point, but you know, as we start getting toward that, like, I'm already starting to pay attention. Like, what are they good at? What do they like? What do they enjoy? Because I just think so much of the Christian life and like a sort of day-to-day faithfulness, especially like vocationally, whether you're doing a career or you're going to just be like a full-time parent or whatever language you want to use for that. I think so much of what it means to live faithfully as a Christian day in and day out is doing the math of, how has God gifted me? and how do I use those gifts in my context in the most effective way possible to help people walk more closely, help myself and help others walk more closely with Jesus. Whether it's like, I'm really good with numbers and can be an accountant for an organization and help them steward their finances well. Or I'm a writer and I want to like write books to help people wonder at the world and through fiction or learn about themselves through a nonfiction or whatever. Or I'm really good at interacting with kids, so I want to be a teacher. I think it's just so much of life is figuring out, how am I gifted? How has the Lord uniquely wired me? And how do I deploy and steward those gifts for the kingdom of God in a way that brings me joy and brings God glory? And, here we're sitting here because we feel like the only reason I'm doing this, I like you guys, but is because I think this kind of thing is what I'm put here to do, Yeah. And I'm not here to be an accountant, not because I don't know that I would enjoy that, but because I'm just not good at that. I'm not good with numbers. So, okay, let's figure something else out, So anyway, that's a little aside, but I think that's just what a lot of life is.
My kids are definitely going into tech, just saying.
Don't force it on them, Joel. Don't do the stereotypical thing. No, it is interesting to really carve out, you identify so many wrongs in the world and you still have to live in it. And there can be, like, I've thought about this sometimes with apologetics ministries, that those are sometimes the most difficult because you're dealing with online hate from all sorts of angles. And it takes a certain type of person to do that. And it's easy to kind of transition to be like, well, why don't we just encourage Christians to do apologetics rather than to do apologetics, which is maybe more difficult. Like you just can run up against, I think some people though, they've kind of tried out the social stuff and then they're like, oh, I don't know if it's going well enough. They haven't gone viral. And so there is kind of an in-between of like, wait, should our organization be doing more social? Should our church, we kind of just linked to stuff. We did this series a long time ago and nothing really happened. We did these 10 videos and we thought it would do well and it didn't go well. And there's a lot of like guesswork in the midst of it. I need to jump off to get my kids, so I'll get to listen to your answer, but I might just jump off now. But I am curious, Chris, like what would you say to the people wrestling in that in between of kind of starting to do it, kind of feeling they don't know if they're gifted. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think giftedness is measured by response.
Agreed.
That might be weird, but like I think giftedness is measured by desire in some sense of I talk with Trevin Wax, my friend, a lot about writing, and he and I have talked a lot about writing over the years. And he was like, a lot of people struggle with whether or not they're a writer. And there have been times where like I've struggled, because I'm not writing weekly anymore for the first time in a long time. I'm not working on a book project for the first time in a number of years. I'm like, man, am I like losing it? Am I just not a writer anymore? Like, what does that mean? And he's like, well, writers just write. It just oozes out of you. You just like, you can't in some sense avoid calling in one, like you can try, like I used the example of how I kind of tried, but there's certain things that our gifts just kind of ooze out of us. We can't help but do a lot of the things that we're gifted at. And I don't think whether or not someone's gifted is necessarily synonymous with or measured by if they're effective, if they're successful, if people are consuming. Because I think there are a lot of people who get a significant audience, but aren't necessarily, doing good and not just moral good, but like aren't necessarily gifted good in quality. That. They've just and they've just learned how to play the game, especially on social media. Like there's just so many ways you can game stuff and be successful, but maybe you dread doing that and you hate it. So is it really a gifting of yours, or you just like attention? So you started creating YouTube videos, and so I think for a lot of people, I've consulted a lot of churches over the years and other ministries I do actively today. I think that I just always encourage people not to get caught up in the response. So much of this is just shouting into the void, wondering if the void is ever going to shout back. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that, for instance, like a church should be posting their sermons on the internet every week in some form or fashion, to whatever degree they can, like as far as budget and all of that kind of stuff goes. Live streaming, I think, is another matter. But like, why wouldn't you? You have this content. It would be sitting on a server or not, or going into the air otherwise. Why not, post it on your site so people can come across it? And if you're able, like, post it on YouTube because it's the second biggest search engine in the world, or first, depending on how you measure. And like, people could stumble across it there and be really served by it. But if they're not, okay, as long as you're not like horribly mismanaging your resources and buying $8,000 cameras and then 3 people are watching your videos, okay, like that's like a wisdom issue. And like, how should we do this effectively? But I think like for nonprofits and churches, creating online content, I think, is endemic to what it means to do ministry today in some form or fashion. Like, I think most of those kinds of ministries should be creating online content in some form. There are degrees to that. There, like, what does that mean? Every ministry is going to be different in that regard. I don't think it necessarily goes over to individuals, obviously, like I've said before. And I think if you're an individual who's creating content, like, you might have only 15 people subscribe to your newsletter. Well, those 15 people are really served. You got 100% open rate. They're really served by it. And you just have to do, again, kind of like considering your gifting and things like that. Is this the best use of the gifts God has given me? Would I be better off taking this writing gift and serving people in another way? Or can I serve these 15 people who subscribe to my newsletter and also serve, the 80 people in my Sunday school ministry at church who I could write the Sunday school lessons there? I'm using my gift of writing to serve those people. And so I think it's for people who might feel on the fence or like, I don't really know if I'm supposed to do this. I think you just create and post and see if anybody's there. If nobody's there, maybe you should just deploy that gift someplace else. But I think so many of the gifts that we would deploy online of communication, is whether it's writing or speaking or whatever else, can be deployed offline in some really effective ways too. So I don't mean to say that if you're a gifted writer, you must be writing on the internet, but it would be kind of silly not to at least like try to distribute your gift in that way, to try to serve in that way. But maybe you should just be writing Sunday school lessons for your local church. And that's a great way to use that gift of writing that the Lord has given you or whatever. So
no, that's good.
And
my wife went to drop off kids, so I'm good, by the way.
Cool.
Oh, it's good. With any gifting too, like, we have to remember, just like with any skill, hobby, discipline or whatever, the only way to ever get good at something is to do it badly for a while so that you can learn how to do it well. So like, you got to get your reps in.
So many things.
Yeah, you got to get your reps in, whether you're writing, whether you're recording videos. Like, your first 100, 500,000 are probably not going to be great, but the only way you're ever going to get to great is to do that first 100, 500,000 of whatever it may be, so you can learn how to get to great. And then go ahead.
And even once you start, like, I'm not saying I'm great, but like I've written a couple books, right? So like, I can write. I'm not wondering if I can write at this point. But even now, like, because I'm in this place where like I'm not writing regularly and I'm having to like every once in a while decide to write something or whatever, there's like, it takes me twice as long to write a 1,000-word article these days because I've got to take some time and pump out the crap. There's a writer who's used better language to describe this, but basically it's like, you just have to, specifically with writing, though I think it would probably apply to some other things as well, you just have to like crank out the crap first and then the good stuff will flow. Like, you
exactly
can't just,
right.
Unless you're like, in your groove and you're like in your prime and you're writing a lot, because in that form, you're like always cranking out the crap and the good is flowing. But if you're kind of in a spot like me, where like you maybe get to write something you're excited about once a week at this point, or once every other week, whether or not you actually share it with anyone, you might, if you have an hour and a half to write, you might spend the first 45 minutes writing stuff you just absolutely hate. So that the second 45 minutes can be stuff that you actually are like, oh, that's not that bad. But you have to like clean out the gunk in that way. And I think there's a lot of truth, no matter in any form of communication and frankly, creative work generally. Yeah. And that's why to your point. So even, you say you have to do it a lot to just get good at it. But I think even once you're good at it, staying fresh, like doing it regularly helps those pipes be clear of gunk more regularly rather than like, oh man, I haven't written in 2 weeks. Like, that's just going to compound the amount of time it's going to take for me to get the junk out before I can get the good stuff.
Yeah, there's like a being in creative shape. Like, it's true for like musicians, especially, where like, if I have a stretch where I haven't picked up a guitar in 6 months, when I pick it up, it's like, what is this instrument again? How do I play this again? But after I, practice every day for a couple of weeks, it's like, all right, hey, I'm back in shape, like everything is smoothed out.
Right.
Same to writing, same to creating videos, like any creative endeavor, like you can be in shape and you can be out of shape. And it sucks to be out of shape.
Yeah.
Can I go through all 10 of the top social media apps and just get Austin and Chris to give me your quick commentary and tips for each one? Is that possible? So like,
I don't know how much help I'm going to be, but I'll try.
so like
I'll
just
do what I
quick
can.
commentary and tips for use. Facebook.
I'll let Chris go. I'll let Chris go first.
Who am I speaking to? Am I speaking to like a person or like a church?
We're the first episode in the series, so let's do a person. Let's just do a person.
Okay, sorry. I need to ask another clarifying question. Who
That's fair.
is this? Just like a dude using Facebook, or is this someone who's like trying to like be an author or be, like trying to like promote themselves? You know what I mean?
They're trying to promote some of the things their church is doing. They're not necessarily aspiring to be an author, but they're like a thoughtful Christian who has posted online before, and they probably won't be an author. They might be a pastor one day down the road, but really right now they're just kind of like, maybe I
Figuring
should.
it
I'm in
out.
my 20s. Maybe I should use Facebook more for the sake of my uncle and aunt. You know,
My advice would be don't expect much and post what you find interesting, but mostly use it to keep up with friends and family who live far away. Don't
Cool.
expect much in terms of people actually reading what you click or anything like that, or what you post or anything like that.
Use it for awareness and influence, not to drive impact, especially if you don't have a large social graph to begin with. Like, the value of Facebook definitely scales the more friends that you have. And so if you are someone like me, I think I have like 500 friends on Facebook, mostly people in my area. Not always the most helpful thing for me, but I can influence those people. So if you set your goals reasonably, sure, go for it. But if you're expecting it to drive book sales, nah, don't waste your time.
okay, something like WhatsApp. How should I be like? How should I think about that app?
So I am not the right person to ask about this. I've never even downloaded it. So
Same.
Cool.
I know
Have
it's
friends on Android that are trapped into WhatsApp.
Yeah, no, I make a point not to be friends with people who have Android phones. That's a joke. But I've literally never. I think I maybe downloaded it once a long time ago, but I've never used it because I get the sense that it's like a best for like international texting, and I don't know enough people internationally to be texting with them that often. Mm-hmm. So I can't speak to WhatsApp, but I get the sense that it's group chat. It serves as like for a lot of people like a Discord or like a Slack. There's a lot of group chatting that goes on there, but I wouldn't have any strategic advice other than if you happen to have a group on there that's super into the kinds of content you're interested in, be sharing interesting articles, things you're writing or whatever.
If you don't have WhatsApp right now at this stage in the game, you probably don't need it. The people that need WhatsApp have already like gathered around it, especially like in an international context. So like, unless that's changing for you and you're like trying to build, like you're going overseas or something like that, if you haven't needed it up until now, you probably don't need it right now at this moment too.
Okay. Instagram. I feel like this is unfair because maybe this is just too difficult to give quick. But Instagram, photo, video sharing, but it's curated, as you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I'm having trouble because we know so little about this person that I'm counseling.
Yeah.
If you get the sense that you have an audience on Instagram, create reels, occasionally post pictures to your grid, post a bunch of stories about topics that you think your audience is interested in, position yourself as an expert as whatever the topic is. Like say you're a parenting expert or something, create stories around that, link to articles in your stories or whatever, and do a lot of talking head stuff, just talking right into your face camera, and help a growing audience see you as an authority of whatever subject that is. That's really if I were coaching like a prospective author or speaker or something like that, that's what I would probably tell them to do on a platform like that.
I wouldn't worry about Instagram unless, like Chris was saying, you know that you have a real strong target audience there, but would only say it's worth spending time there if you have a certain baseline in video work and graphic design and photography. Like there is some kind of like minimum threshold of skills you need to have in those areas to make it worthwhile your time there. It's not like other platforms where you can just post junk and it probably be fine. Like there are some standards you have to kind of rise to.
Would you
Interesting.
say TikTok is, you can almost compare it to Instagram and how it's different?
Yeah.
So for TikTok, it would be similar but less polished than Instagram.
If
Yeah,
you
I mean-
don't, go ahead.
There are plenty of people who probably post the same exact content to both places, and I think that's probably fine.
Mhm.
But TikTok has a lower expectation of polish than Instagram does, generally speaking. I think TikTok is more amenable to slapdash individual creators. The more polished stuff I see on TikTok, the more likely I am to scroll by it thinking it's an
Yep.
ad.
Exactly right. Yeah.
YouTube
yeah, TikTok-
Shorts. Go ahead, Austin. Sorry.
Well, yeah, TikTok is also good too if you don't have good video editing skills and all you're able to do is just record a video of yourself talking to your phone, and you don't have the ability to caption your videos or the know-how to do effects and stuff like that. If you're doing short form video on any other platform and you're not captioning your videos, you're not optimizing for muted playback, you are wasting your time. It is the most important thing you can do outside of TikTok. Caption your videos.
So this is actually super helpful. Like I am kind of the audience here, and I'm learning. So I should have just said
The last stat I
Getting
saw,
closer.
the stat I saw probably, gosh, it's 3 or 4 years old now, but I'm sure it's at least as true, if not more true, is 73% of people watch videos with the sound off.
Yeah.
I did not.
Wow.
know
So
that.
if you
Yeah.
don't create captions, you're only reaching 27% of the audience. Like, captions are a prerequisite for video. You must
Absolutely.
do captions.
Absolutely.
Even if they're goofy and only 70% right, that's people will fill
That's
in
fine.
the context
right.
and figure it out.
That's such a good point.
And Instagram especially has really good built-in auto captioning tools. It's an extra 5 minutes of work to get that benefit. If you're uploading to Instagram, you're shooting yourself in the foot to not even do just that.
So here's an interesting one that, especially in the Christian community, is like LinkedIn. Like I'm
I
a
have
LinkedIn
opinions
guy,
on this one.
so I'm curious about that.
Go for it, Austin.
If you had told me when I was coming into TGC that LinkedIn would become one of my favorite places to spend time at, I would have said you're insane. But it is absolutely true. LinkedIn is actually great, and probably one of TGC's like healthiest spaces that we're in right now. We have some of the most engaged, positive, constructive readers that we have on any other social media presence. Like, it is, I would have never have guessed that.
They're all
into it.
verified working individuals.
Yeah, like it's wild. Like, yeah, LinkedIn has its own weird quirks. Like, especially like LinkedIn influencer culture is just comical. It's just so comically stupid. But no, like LinkedIn is honestly one of my favorite places to spend time now because it's much more purposeful. Like, you're not there just to be there. You're there because you're thinking about work and your job and wanting to and use the time you spend on social media to get better at your job. I'm very positive on LinkedIn, which is something I never thought I would say.
Yeah, I find LinkedIn personally pretty cringy for all the reasons Austin just described. But I find it also like practically helpful, like for connecting with people around like that I don't necessarily know personally, but may want to like message and see like, hey, are you going to this event that I'm going to or something? Like, I find it professionally kind of helpful, truly. And I think that in a sense, like, yeah, LinkedIn is what we all kind of to some degree wish Facebook could be again. Like, it feels a little bit like old school Facebook, where you can actually like engage around articles in some ways that are, I don't personally do this. Like, I go to LinkedIn to see if anyone's asking to connect with me or message me or whatever, and then I kind of bounce out. Like, I'm not like actively consuming content on LinkedIn, but I've seen a lot of what Austin's describing, where like a brand, an institution can get some of its most thoughtful social media engagement there.
Absolutely.
Because people aren't going to act a fool on their, on their LinkedIn profiles as much as they are anywhere else. And so, and in that way, it's a little bit like what Twitter used to be. Now, you've always had trolls on Twitter. It's not like you never, but some, like, I would say, I'm guessing TGC would probably say 7-10 years ago, the best engagement, like the best conversations they saw around their articles would have been on Twitter. But today, that's just where all the critics are. Like, you're not going to get a lot of like helpful engagement there.
Things have improved. Things have improved substantially since we started doing all of our articles natively. That did drop the amount of critical activity by a seismic amount. But we regularly have more people reading our articles natively on LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn's native article functionality is actually pretty good. And we regularly have more people read our articles on LinkedIn natively than they do on our Facebook and Twitter account, both of which are like 10 times the size of our LinkedIn footprint. Like, it's crazy.
So I think,
Twitter X, you were saying? Twitter X they have the anon aspect of it, whereas LinkedIn is not anonymous, right?
Right. And so I think that it's weird. Like, I personally find a lot of LinkedIn kind of cringe, but it is, I think, like, practically, especially for organizations, even more than individuals, like for brands. There's a lot of platforms these days that just like brands on Twitter, for the most part, with few exceptions. Dead. Yeah. Like
TikTok, brands on TikTok are dead. Like,
right. Unless you're adapting to the platform. Like, there are some brands that have kind of adapted to the platform that can, because of who they are. But generally speaking, I think LinkedIn can be one of the best platforms for like an institution or that kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, we don't have to go through. One of the fascinating things to me in this conversation is just thinking about these as outlets for good content and kind of wrestling through my own, because I'm in a PhD program. I'm going to have a dissertation at the end of it. I'm going to want that to be published, and I want to serve the church. So I'll probably want like a popular level version of whatever, idolatry and technology. And I'm kind of going down this path, and yet I'm shying away from some of the social media maximal. Like, I'm not maxing on social media the way I could be, partially because I just don't want to spend the time thinking about it and that sort of thing. And what you guys are offering is like, well, just do this. And it's this like simple, well, you can just do it. And I'd rather have a disposition towards creation than consumption in the way that I approach social media. And the way that you're articulating it, I'm like, well, if I just use like if I stick to just consuming social media only on Fridays, as an example, but then I'm creating other days of the week and, publishing through something like Buffer as a third-party app so that I don't get sucked into it. There's a world in which it's a little bit more doable. And obviously we can be sharing our podcast recording stuff better than we do now too.
But I think, too, one important dynamic that will especially be important whenever you get around to actually publishing your dissertation, and if you do a book of it later on, is that social media is not just a dumping ground for content. As much as we talk about like publishing content or what formats or types of content, social media, I mean, the accent has never really moved away from social in social media. Like, there is a networking aspect to it, an engaging aspect to it, in having conversations with people that just posting content alone can't replicate.
Right.
And so that's where a lot of brands in particular like really fall into a trap of like, they're great at posting content, but they struggle to take the time to engage with their audience or respond to their audience. And there's a lot of treasure to be had there. There's a lot of gains to be made there. It's time consuming, but it's worthwhile. It's just like having a conversation, in person or over a cup of coffee over a Zoom call. It's time consuming, but it's time well spent.
I think too, Andrew, like thinking of you in mind now as a possibly, trying to write a dissertation and maybe position yourself as an expert in this field, which I think is great. Like, I think a great way, like I've one of my jobs back when I was at Lifeway was coaching authors who had varying degrees of commercial success. Like, I was coaching some authors who were just writing their first book, and then I was coaching some authors who were selling hundreds of thousands of copies of their books on social media. I was coaching them all on various degrees of social media. Some people, I was teaching them how to blog because they could write books, but they froze up at blogging, which is kind of funny, but it's true. And because it's a different, muscle set. But then there are some authors who were, again, maybe selling tens of thousands of books, but like didn't know how to do Instagram well or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so what I would always tell them is, especially if they were struggling, the biggest, most common struggle was like, what do I even post? I don't even know what to do. Like, what do I even, and I think this advice kind of goes for someone like you. I don't know if that's one of the hurdles you kind of have, but it's a great way for someone who's either writing a book or sharpening a speaking thing or work on a dissertation to use social media, and particularly, especially for a writer, more like, long form text based social media, perhaps than even video, is just like as a place to spar, not argue. That's not what I mean, but like as a place to like try out ideas. Like you've got like, oh man, I think this really could be a section of that chapter. Well, let me just like write it up as an article, as a sort of like exercise, see how I feel about it after I write it, and see if anybody shouts back from the void about like, oh, hey, that's a really good point. Or I think I see your argument, but I think your argument would be better if you used this example instead. And you can kind of use, like, I've done that a lot in my writing of books. Like what's funny is like, I've been the most active writer in a newsletter while I'm writing a book at the same time, which doesn't seem like it should make sense because I'm writing a book and all of my attention should be going to that. But like, I'm already in that like creative, like workout mode. And it's like, oh man, this is a really interesting point I'd like to maybe put in that chapter, but I don't know how I feel about it. Maybe I'll just write up like a quick 500-word blog post and put it out there and see if people like resound with it or they think it's dumb. And then that can help me figure out like how I shape that into the bigger work that I'm working on. So I think, though I understand with kids and PhD, there's a reason I'm not doing a PhD right now. And it's not because I don't think I could. It's because I don't want to try to do it with kids and a job and all that. But I think like in your situation, if you can find a way to just start creating like a newsletter, or even if you want to do it via YouTube, or you want to just do it through this podcast, find a sort of gym to work out your ideas as you're getting closer to this kind of big project and product, and use it as a way to sharpen yourself. And like, even if that stuff ends up cutting room floor, it's still a good exercise, Yeah. So anyway.
No, it's great. I've stolen a bunch of the time just for myself after stealing a bunch of yours at the beginning of this with my poor internet connection. So I'll find out what you said when I was disconnected earlier. Hopefully it was all good. I'm sure it was. Chris, this has been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll stay in touch because I think I have more to learn from you, and so do our listeners.
Yeah, man, I was glad to be here. Good to be with you guys again, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you for listening to What Would Jesus Tech. What were you going to say, Joel? Do you want to do the outro?
No. This is not my skill, clearly. My skill is let's talk about hi-fi techno stuff,
Yeah.
Social stuff.
Lo-fi and hi-fi, both and. Thank you to those who support us on Patreon. You can do so patreon.com/whatwouldjesustech. And you can find out more about our previous episodes with Chris Martin. He's been on twice before. He's kind of a consistent guest here. Whatwouldjesustech.com. You can search the archive there. Thank you for listening. Use tech, find rest, glorify God. Take care.